first of all, Emily, can you give us some background of your family and why and when you came to Oskaloosa, Iowa?
Okay, well, I was born in Oskaloosa, so I didn't come to Oskaloosa, but my parents did. They were from Missouri, and they came here in 1914, and my father came here to, he was hired to come here and manage the Frankel store from Missouri. His parents had a store in New Franklin, Missouri, and so my dad, my father's father died when my father was in high school, senior in high school, and my dad always bragged about the fact that he didn't graduate from high school because he only had 3 months left to go. I don't know why he didn't finish, but I always thought that was kind of silly. But at any rate, he quit high school to mind the store, to run the store in New Franklin, and support the family actually. And he was one of 6 children, and so they had a store in New Franklin that Alsops had. His grandfather also had a store in New Franklin. So at any rate, how this happened, I do not know. I'm just assuming that the Frankels from Oskaloosa found out that Dad was there, and they were looking for a manager for the Frankel store here in Oskaloosa because I think they were moving to Des Moines. And so they needed a manager for the Frankel store in Oskaloosa, and they hired my dad. And he was a young man and just married. And so he came up here and managed the Frankel store. This was in 1914. And in 1920, he went in with Art Oppenheimer, who had a store here, and it was called the Golden Eagle. It was a men's store, and Oppenheimer's, which was a ladies' store. They went in together, and they bought out Waldorf Rosenblatt, which is where the shoe store is now. They had a store in that whole quarter block there. And they let's see, they did the 2 Oppenheimer stores in Waldorf, Rosenblatt, and Frankel's. All those stores they joined, and they had a store called Oppenheimer Alsops, which was quite a big department store at the time. And they did that in 1920, my dad did, and they had that for 10 years. And in 1930, they sold that store, Oppenheimer Alsops, to Sears Roebuck. And my father then went to work for Sears and went to Des Moines. And he was with the Sears store in Des Moines and also around the state. And he was there for 2 years. And from then he didn't really like working for somebody else so much. He really wanted to have his own store. And so he came to Oskaloosa and opened Alsops. And he was either going to go back to Oskaloosa and open a store, or I know my mother always said this, or go to Chattanooga. There was an opening there, I think, for a store. And he chose Oskaloosa, and I think my mother wanted to go to Chattanooga. But anyway, they opened a store in Oskaloosa at the corner of High Avenue and First, there where it was. And they didn't own the building there, but they rented it from the Williamses, who owned the building. And they opened that store, and this was in the middle of the Depression, because this was 1932, and when the banks were closing here, and it was quite a quite a thing to open a store in the middle of the Depression, but he made a go of it, and it worked, and so that's how he started the store. And he had the store for my father died in 1959 at the age of 70, and at that time it was my brother came back after World War II and went into the store, and he took over the store. It was really kind of funny because my dad always bragged about the fact that he didn't graduate from high school, and my brother graduated from Harvard Business School.
Oh.
So they were somewhat opposite in there, but they got along just fine. My brother had a little different way of doing things than my dad, but it worked out fine. So then my brother had the store he sold it to Tenny Pixley in it was either 1970 or 71 or 2. My mother died in 1970, and Carol sold the store very soon thereafter. And so that's kind of the history of the Alsops store. I think it's always been kind of interesting to me because probably one of the mentors of my father was one of the Frankel's brothers, and anytime my dad needed some advice or something, he'd always go to Des Moines and talk with him, I know. And so, and they always said, of course they were in Yonkers at the time, and had interest there. And they always said as long as my dad had the store here, they would not open a Yonkers store in Oskaloosa. And they didn't until after Dad died. They did after when my brother had it, but they didn't when Dad had it. So that was kind of interesting, I thought. But so that's basically, I would say, what the history of, as I can say, in Alsops. I was quite young. I was in 4th grade when we moved back to Oskaloosa, and when he opened the store. So I was pretty young at the time.
Well, it says here it was there for 117 years. Is that the length of time?
Well, I think they were counting when there was an Alsops in Missouri.
Oh, okay. I haven't read the whole article, but then it moved to the mall here. And when did the mall start?
Well, and then Pixley's moved it into the mall.
Right.
They kept it there at that location for a while.
So basically from 1933, it opened in the Iowa Masons Benevolent Society building.
Yeah.
And
in 1932 is when he opened it, September of 1932. And so, and then it was, I don't know when it moved into, when it closed into the mall,
Yeah.
but Alsops stayed in the mall several years before it closed.
Well,
under the Pixleys.
Yes. Well, is there any other memories you'd like to share about the building and the renovation of putting the Alsops store in there? Because it sounded like it started on one floor and grew to include all 3 floors and the basement.
And the basement, yes, that's correct, yeah. So it grew quite a bit. Well, I can remember enough when it was just on the one floor, and there was a beauty shop in the back.
Okay.
I can remember that. And there was always a shoe store, Brady's. Brady's eventually opened their own shoe store across the square there. But they always, for years, they had a shoe store, shoe department there. And then when they went to 2nd floor, we were never to call it the basement. We were to call it the lower level.
Oh, okay.
And there was a dressmaking up there on the 2nd floor, as well as the ready-to-wear was on the 2nd floor. And then the 3rd floor, there was, at one time, there was the offices were on the third floor, and also at one time there was a, what would you call it?
Like fancy, there was prom dresses up there, I think, when I was in high school.
In the third floor?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
There
See?
were, yeah.
You know, I was gone part of the time, so I,
Yeah,
that part of it I was.
that's what I recall
yeah.
was on the third floor, was sort of like the Bridal Dreams plan with all the
Right.
special occasion clothing. And then the basement, or the lower level was housewares, as I recall.
Yes, there was more, well, there was dry goods in the lower level, and then on one side, and then on the other side was a gift shop.
Yeah.
Gift shop. And at one time, there was kind of a gift shop on the third floor, too, and Alice Laverson had it, I remember. And so...
And if you ever went there and bought something, they always, as I recall, wrapped it in red and it had a green ribbon. And you really thought you were getting something special if you had a box from Alsops. If you
Yes,
asked for it to
they
be
would-
gift wrapped,
they would-
it would be
they
gift
would
wrapped.
gift
That
wrap
way
it.
you would know that it was Alsops from Alsops. And
They would gift wrap it, yes,
Yes.
that's right. When it was on the first floor, there was a balcony up there, and I remember they'd have gift wrapping up on the balcony,
Yeah.
as well as restrooms, I can remember. And so it did change quite a bit. And then, there were all these different departments, and it was a department store.
Mm-hmm.
They had hosiery and gloves, and, I can remember who was the clerks in the different departments,
Yeah.
And it was a really a nice department store.
Yes, it was.
And it became, of course, hometown private department stores are just, became a thing of the past. They could not compete with with the Yonkers, and now the Yonkers can't compete with the...
With the internet.
Yes, with the... which became Macy's and that sort of thing, and they can't compete with the internet, yes, like you say.
Yeah.
So...
Okay, well that's great. That's wonderful history, because I think everybody that I know about remembers Alsops on the square, and it was just kind of iconic. So thank you, Emily. If there's anything else you'd like to share, but I'm happy with this history. It's great.
I'm just kind of curious, what do you think when you walk by it or you go into it today? Do you have these memories?
Yeah, I do.
That come back? You're like, I remember Dad and I did something over in this part of the building, or
Yes.
do you remember those things?
Yes, I can remember. Dad had a Melon Lumen sale every year. They called it a Melon Lumen sale. Why, I don't know why they called it that. And so when I was, in grade school, and he'd say, all right, I'll hire you. You can come down and help the Melon Lumen sale, because it'd be really crowded. And so they'd say, well, now, so-and-so here has a tendency to pick things up, so you kind of watch that person. And I remember doing that, and they'd finally have to take me off and say, Emily, you're watching too close. You're not doing a very good job. I can remember things like that.
Do you get smiles when you go by those places? And
Yeah. And I just think of, Faye Miller, who was, Faye and Grace Miller. They were sisters, and they worked there for years. And Faye had lingerie. She would fit you with brasiers and things like that. And Grace would do hosiery and gloves. And I can just remember Grace, you'd sit there with your hands like this. She'd put these gloves on you like this. And there was a hat department, a millinery department, they called it. And that was Rose. She had the millinery, and she'd put those hats on you like that. Yeah. There's lots of memories, lots of memories.
So, well, and then, if I remember right, your good friend Mary was just down the street, wasn't she? Is that Mary Sundstrom?
Oh, yes, the Sunstroms, of course, with men's store.
Yeah.
That was the men's store. Had been there for years, too, you know. It was started out as the Hub, I think, and then the Sunstroms. But it was always the Sunstroms people, even when it was the Hub, it was the Sunstroms people that were running it. Yeah, and there again, that men's clothing became harder to have before women's.
Yeah.
So lots of memories. I mean, it's the buildings. We look at them and we appreciate them for their architecture, but they're really a connection to the generations of Oskaloosa,
Yeah.
aren't they?
Uh-huh. It was, you know, the downtown was so different then. It really was, because of the little stores. You know, they weren't the only ones, but it was nice. But it's just a different time now. Just a different time.
Are you glad the building's still there?
What?
Are you glad the building is still there?
Oh, yes. I just think Oski's just done a great job on the buildings. I think Oski's done a great job, really, preserving what's good about the town. And
It has the initial threshold now, too. They took off 7 or 8 layers. I don't know where you go into that building. I don't know if you've noticed that, which is supposed to be the original
Floor.
threshold, the initial, yeah, the original floor
No,
going into the building.
oh,
So, I don't know, you might check
no,
that
yeah,
out and see if you
I'll
remember
have to
that.
do that.
So,
Yeah.
Well,
that's great.
is there anything else you need?
I
Ann?
don't think so. I think
I
this is wonderful.
could just pick on Emmy all day long because
I know.
she's one of those folks that you poke her a little bit and something else pops out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you know, as far as that building is concerned, you know, Johnson Abstract used to be upstairs there,
Yeah.
and they would go up by the stairway on the side of the building. You know, you
Of
did
the fire
that.
escape, what we think
And
of
when
the fire
Car-
escape.
When Carl Johnson got older and he had a hard time getting up there, Dad, he'd come in Alsops and go up the elevator, and then Dad built built an entrance on the second floor into Johnson Abstract for him, and I think he never did forget that. So when he died and they sold Johnson Insurance and Abstract, Chuck wanted, my husband, who was in the insurance business, he wanted to buy the Johnson Insurance. And he went in there and they said, well, we're going to sell them together, both the Abstract and the insurance together. And so Chuck turned around and walked out, and then he said, well, why not? And then, so he put his name in to buy the insurance and the Abstract. And there were several people who wanted to buy it, and at the time. And I think they let Chuck have it because they remembered how Dad had
Yeah.
let Carl go up on the elevator and go through there.